Welcome, folks, and let me spin you a tale of redemption, courage, and the transformative power of a grizzled old soldier. Enjoy the story. James Winthrop was the epitome of a spoiled rich kid. Born into one of the wealthiest families in America, he had never worked a day in his life. His father, Robert Winthrop, was a self-made billionaire who had built his fortune through grit, determination, and shrewd business deals. But James had been handed everything on a silver platter since birth. Growing up in the lap of luxury, James developed an unshakable sense of entitlement. As a child, he would throw epic tantrums, screaming at the top of his lungs and hurling expensive toys across his palatial bedroom until he got his way. Nanny after nanny quit in frustration, unable to handle his outrageous behavior. "I don't get paid enough to deal with this little monster," one nanny huffed as she stormed out with her suitcases, never to return. But it wasn't entirely James's fault. His mother, Sarah, had tragically passed away from cancer when he was only 5 years old. Her grueling battle had ravaged both her body and mind, before finally claiming her life. Robert was devastated by the loss of his beloved wife. He threw himself into his work, building his company into an even bigger empire, but leaving little time for James. As James grew into a young man, his behavior only worsened. With an unlimited credit card and no supervision, he indulged his every hedonistic impulse. Booze-fueled parties, designer drug binges, trashed hotel rooms. It was all fair game for the Winthrop heir. Scandal followed him everywhere. The latest incident had been an epic meltdown at a high-end supermarket. Drunk and belligerent, James had verbally assaulted the staff and security guards trying to escort him out. He smashed bottles of expensive wine and wielded a jagged shard of glass as a weapon, while staggering through the aisles. It took a squad of police officers to finally subdue him. Robert had been forced to cut a hefty check to the supermarket owners for the damages. He also had to pay off the traumatized employees to avoid a messy lawsuit. But worst of all was the viral video of James's outburst that spread like wildfire online, bringing shame to the respected Winthrop name. Something had to change. Robert knew he couldn't let his son continue on this destructive path. But disowning his only child, his last link to his beloved Sarah, was unthinkable. Late one sleepless night, staring at a photo of Sarah on his mahogany desk, Robert made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hello, John. It's Robert Winthrop. I need your help." John Ryder listened patiently as his old army buddy spilled his guts over the phone. The two men had served together in the 101st Airborne Division, jumping out of planes and raising hell across the globe. Though their lives had taken very different paths since then, the bonds of combat still held strong. After retiring as a lieutenant colonel, John had left the Air Force behind for a quiet life on his farm in rural Pennsylvania. With no family to keep him occupied, he spent his days tending to his crops and animals, enjoying the slow pace and solitude. Robert's desperate plea stirred something in the old soldier. He had never had kids of his own, but he had whipped countless unruly recruits into shape during his military days. Maybe he could do the same for James. "Send him to me," John said gruffly. "I'll make a man out of that boy or die trying." Robert breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, John. You have no idea what this means to me." The next morning, Robert summoned James to his sprawling Manhattan office. The young man sauntered in 2 hours late, reeking of booze and stale cigarettes, his designer suit rumpled. He slouched insolently in the leather chair across from his father's desk. "You wanted to see me, Dad?" James drawled. Robert took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Son, I've arranged for you to take a little trip, call it a vacation of sorts." James perked up at that, a sly grin spreading across his face. "A vacation? Now you're talking. Where to? The French Riviera? Ibiza? Vegas?" Robert shook his head. "Not exactly. You're going to spend some time with an old friend of mine, John Ryder. He lives on a farm in Pennsylvania." James stared at his father in disbelief, then burst out laughing. "A farm? In Pennsylvania? You've got to be kidding me. What am I supposed to do there, milk cows and shovel manure?" "You'll do whatever John tells you to do," Robert said sternly, "and you'll do it without complaint. Consider it a chance to clear your head, get some fresh air, and exercise." Exercise? James scoffed. I have a personal trainer for that. I don't need to go to some backwoods farm. Robert's face darkened. This isn't a request, James. It's an order. You either go stay with John and follow his rules, or I'll cut you off completely. No more money, no more credit cards, no more trust fund. You'll be on your own. The color drained from James's face as the reality of his father's threat sank in. Struggling to maintain his bravado, he shrugged his shoulders. Fine, whatever. I'll go hang out with your farmer friend for a few days, but I'm not shoveling any manure. The sleek black town car rolled to a stop on the dirt driveway of John Ryder's farmhouse. James stepped out, squinting in the bright sunlight. He was hungover from his farewell bender in the city the night before, and in no mood for the fresh country air his father kept yammering on about. John emerged from the house, his posture ramrod straight despite his advancing age. He wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt, and a no-nonsense expression. James looked him up and down, unimpressed. "So you're the guy who's supposed to turn me into a real man, huh?" James sneered. "Good luck with that. We're not here to chit-chat," John barked. "From now on, you'll address me as Sir. Is that clear?" James rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure, whatever you say, sir." His voice dripped with sarcasm. Quick as a flash, John was in his face, his steely blue eyes boring into James's bloodshot ones. "Let me make something clear, boy. You may be the big man back in New York City, but out here, I'm in charge. You'll do what I say, when I say it, no questions asked. And if you give me attitude, you'll regret it. Understand?" James swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He managed a meek nod. "Yes, sir." "Good." John turned to Robert. "I'll take it from here." Robert gave his son one last pained look. "Be good, James. Listen to John. He's here to help you." With that, he climbed back into the car and sped off down the driveway. James stood awkwardly, his designer loafers sinking into the mud, as John eyed him up and down. "First things first, hand over your phone and any other contraband." "My phone?" James protested. "But how will I stay in touch with—" "With who? Your drug dealer? Your drinking buddies?" John cut him off. "You won't need them here. Now hand it over." Grumbling, James fished his iPhone out of his pocket and slapped it into John's waiting palm. The old soldier promptly hurled it into the nearby pond with a satisfying splash. "What the hell?" James yelped. "That was a brand new phone." "You won't need it," John repeated calmly. "Now get inside and put on some proper work clothes. We've got a lot to do, and I don't intend to waste any time." As James slouched into the house, he could feel dread settling into the pit of his stomach. What had he gotten himself into? The first week on John's farm was the worst of James's life. The old soldier hadn't been kidding about putting him to work. Every morning, John would burst into James's room at the crack of dawn, banging a metal trash can lid like a gong. "Rise and shine, princess," he'd bellow. James would lurch awake with a pounding headache, his body aching from the previous day's labors. John had him mucking out stables, repairing fences, hauling hay bales, backbreaking work that left him filthy, exhausted, and miserable. The physical training was even worse. John would lead James on grueling cross-country runs, pushing him to keep up until he collapsed in a gasping, sweaty heap. Then it was an endless litany of push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, far beyond anything his personal trainer had ever demanded. "Is that all you've got?" John would taunt as James struggled. "My grandma could do better than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. James wanted nothing more than to tell the sadistic old man to go to hell. But the memory of his father's threat kept him in line, and so he soldiered on, his soft city hands blistering and bleeding, his designer clothes caked in dirt and drenched in sweat. But it was the lack of his usual vices that really pushed James to the brink. Cut off from the booze, drugs, and endless stream of women, he felt like he was losing his mind. The sleepless nights were the worst, his skin crawling with need, desperate for a fix. One night, unable to take it anymore, James snuck out of the farmhouse and hot-wired John's ancient pickup truck. He peeled out of the driveway and floored it down the dark country roads, not even sure where he was going. He just needed to escape. He hadn't gotten far when he saw the flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. Shit! James smacked the steering wheel in frustration as he pulled over. The police officer approached the truck, shining his flashlight in James's face. License and registration. I don't have it on me, James stammered. This isn't my truck. The cop's eyes narrowed. Step out of the vehicle, son. James complied, nearly falling on his face as he staggered out. The cop took one look at his bloodshot eyes and haggard appearance and reached for his handcuffs. Just then, another vehicle came screeching to a halt behind the police cruiser. John leapt out and stormed over, his face a thundercloud. Officer, I can explain, he said tersely. This young man is my responsibility. I apologize for the trouble. The cop looked skeptical, but after a tense conversation, he agreed to release James into John's custody with a warning. The ride back to the farm was silent, the air crackling with tension. As soon as they pulled into the driveway, John whirled on James, his voice low and furious. Pull a stunt like that again and I'll have you locked up myself. I made a promise to your daddy and I aim to keep it, come hell or high water. You're not leaving this farm until I say so. Got it? James nodded miserably. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Yes, sir. As the weeks dragged on, James slowly began to change. The grueling physical labor and training toughened his body, replacing his doughy physique with lean, hard muscle. John's discipline instilled a sense of structure and purpose that had always been lacking in his aimless, hedonistic life. But the biggest transformation was in James's attitude. Stripped of his wealth and status, forced to confront his own weakness and inadequacy, he started to see the world differently. The entitlement and arrogance that had always defined him began to melt away, replaced by a growing humility and determination. John watched the change with quiet satisfaction, his gruff exterior concealing a glimmer of pride. He began to share bits of hard-earned wisdom with James as they worked side by side in the fields or sat on the porch in the evening, sipping iced tea. You know why I push you so hard, boy? He asked one night. It's because I see potential in you. You've got a chance to be more than just another spoiled rich brat, but you've got to earn it. Ain't nothing in this life comes free. James nodded slowly, absorbing the words. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of something like purpose. Maybe there was more to him than just being Robert Winthrop's screw-up son. As the summer wore on, James found himself spending more and more time with Sarah, the pretty farmhand who helped out on John's property. With her sun-kissed skin, twinkling blue eyes, and easy laugh, she was unlike any girl he had ever met back in the city. At first, James tried to charm her with his usual playboy tactics, but Sarah saw right through his act, calling him out on his bull with a sharp wit that left him tongue-tied and blushing. Intrigued, James found himself actually trying to engage her in real conversation, listening intently as she talked about her dreams of going to college and seeing the world. Slowly but surely, a genuine bond began to form between them. They would steal moments together whenever they could, lingering by the water pump, brushing hands as they reached for tools, exchanging secret smiles across the dinner table. For the first time, James felt the stirrings of something real, something beyond the superficial flings he was used to. But trouble was brewing on the horizon. A group of local toughs had taken a disliking to the city slicker invading their turf. They'd cruise by the farm in their souped-up trucks, hurling insults and empty beer cans. John warned James to steer clear, but he was done backing down from bullies. Things came to a head one night at the local dive bar. James was shooting pool with Sarah when the gang leader shouldered up to him, reeking of cheap booze and cheaper cologne. "Why don't you run on back to your penthouse, pretty boy," he sneered, "and leave the girl for a real man?" James refused to take the bait, turning back to the pool table. But then the thug made the mistake of grabbing Sarah's arm, leering down at her. "Come on, honey, ditch this loser and I'll show you a real good time." Something snapped inside James. Before he knew what he was doing, he had whirled around and cracked his pool cue across the goon's face. The man reeled back, blood spurting from his shattered nose. All hell broke loose. The rest of the gang jumped James, fists and boots flying. But months of hard training had honed his reflexes and toughened his body. He fought like a man possessed, taking as good as he got, determined to protect Sarah. It was a brutal, bloody brawl. By the time John and the bartender managed to break it up, James was barely standing, his face a mess of cuts and rapidly swelling bruises. but he had sent a clear message. He wasn't going to let anyone push him or the people he cared about around anymore. John half-carried James out to his truck, Sarah hovering anxiously at their side. As they bumped down the dark country roads back to the farm, John glanced over at his battered young charge. "Proud of you, kid," he said gruffly. "You showed some real heart back there." Through his one good eye, James managed a weak grin. "Learned from the best, sir." The next morning, James limped into the kitchen, his face a patchwork of bandages and bruises. John looked up from his coffee, eyeing him appraisingly. "How you feeling, Rocky?" James eased himself into a chair with a wince. "Like I went 10 rounds with a meat grinder, but I'll live." John nodded, satisfied. "Good, because we need to talk about your future." James felt a flicker of apprehension. Was John about to tell him it was time to go back to New York? The thought filled him with a surprising sense of dread. Somewhere along the way, this farm, these people, had started to feel like home. But John's next words took him by surprise. "I've been thinking, kid. You've come a long way these past months, showed a lot of grit and determination. I think you've got what it takes to make something of yourself, something real." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" John fixed him with a level gaze. "I mean the military, son. I think you should enlist. The army could use a man like you. It'll give you structure, purpose, a chance to serve something bigger than yourself. And with my recommendation, you could even go to officer candidate school, become a leader of men." James sat back, stunned. The military? Him? It was the last thing he would have ever considered before. But now the idea took root in his mind, filling him with a sense of excitement and possibility. A chance to forge his own path, step out of his father's shadow, make a real difference in the world. He thought of Sarah, of the future they could build together. With the discipline and skills he would learn in the army, he could become a man worthy of her, someone who could give her the life she deserved. James met John's eyes, a slow grin spreading across his battered face. "I'm in, sir. Where do I sign up?" 2 months later, Robert Winthrop's sleek black town car once again rolled down the dirt driveway of John Ryder's farm. But the man who stepped out was not the same one who had dropped off a surly, spoiled boy that summer day. James strode forward to greet his father, his posture straight and proud in his crisp new army dress uniform. The transformation was stunning. Gone was the petulant, entitled brat. In his place stood a confident, disciplined young soldier. Robert stared at his son, his eyes glistening with emotion. "James," he said hoarsely, You look like a man." James clasped his father's hand firmly. "I am a man, Dad. Thanks to John. He saved my life out here, gave me a purpose, a path forward. I'm joining the army. I'm going to make something of myself, make you proud." Robert pulled his son into a fierce embrace, his voice choked with tears. "I'm already proud, son. So damn proud. Your mother would be too." John watched the reunion from the porch, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had done his job, taken a lost, broken boy and forged him into a man. The kid had a long road ahead of him, but he had the tools now to make it. That night, the three men sat on the porch, sipping bourbon and swapping stories under the star-strewn Pennsylvania sky. James regaled them with his plans for the future. Basic training, officer candidate school, maybe even airborne school following in John's footsteps. "I'm going to make a difference," he vowed. "Be a leader, serve my country. And when I'm ready, I'm going to come back and marry Sarah, give her the life she deserves." Robert raised his glass in a toast. "To the future," he declared, "and to second chances." "Hooah!" John echoed, clinking his glass against the others. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. A moment of pride, of hope, of new beginnings. James Winthrop had entered that farm a spoiled, lost boy. He left it a man with a purpose, ready to take on the world, and he owed it all to the tough love and unshakable faith of one grizzled old soldier who had never given up on him. 1 year later, James and Sarah stood hand in hand at the altar, their eyes shining with love and joy. He cut a dashing figure in his dress uniform, the gold bars of a second lieutenant gleaming on his shoulders. She was radiant in a simple white gown, a crown of wildflowers in her hair. The small church was packed with friends and family from both the city and the country. Robert Winthrop sat in the front pew, his eyes misty with pride and remembrance. Beside him, John Ryder stood ramrod straight, his chest bedecked with gleaming medals, a rare smile softening his craggy face. As the happy couple exchanged their vows, James reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. The spoiled, reckless boy he had once been seemed like a distant memory. In his place stood a man of courage, honor, and purpose, ready to take on whatever challenges life threw his way. He squeezed Sarah's hand, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. She had stood by him through it all, believed in him even when he hadn't believed in himself. With her by his side, he felt like he could conquer the world. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. James pulled Sarah into his arms, kissing her deeply, pouring all his love and devotion into that one perfect moment. And as they walked out into the bright sunlight, ready to embark on their new life together, James knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with the love of his wife, the support of his family, and the values he had learned on that Pennsylvania farm, he was ready for anything. As they climbed into the waiting limo, decorated with ribbons and trailing tin cans, James took one last look back at the church. There, standing on the steps, were the two men who had made it all possible: his father, Robert, and his mentor, John. Robert met his son's gaze, his eyes shining with love and pride. He raised a hand in farewell, a gesture of blessing and release. James nodded back, a lump in his throat. He knew his father had struggled to let go of the dreams he had once had for his only son. But in the end, Robert had come to understand that James needed to forge his own path, find his own way to make a difference in the world. John, ever the stoic soldier, simply snapped off a crisp salute, but James could see the glimmer of emotion in the old warrior's eyes. In the short time they had known each other, John had become more than just a mentor. He had become a second father, a guiding light in the darkness. James returned the salute, his own eyes stinging with tears. As the limo pulled away, James wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders, pulling her close. He knew that the future held many unknowns: long deployments, lonely nights, the ever-present danger that came with serving one's country. But he also knew that with Sarah by his side, he could face anything. And as they drove off into the golden sunset, ready to begin their new life together, James felt a sense of deep peace wash over him. He had started this journey a lost and troubled soul, searching for meaning in all the wrong places. But through the love of his family, the guidance of a wise old soldier, and the unwavering faith of the woman he adored, he had found his true calling. James Winthrop was no longer just a name, no longer just the heir to a fortune. He was a soldier, a leader, a husband, a man who had been given a second chance, and who was determined to make the most of it. And as the limo disappeared into the distance, the strains of "Anchors Aweigh" drifting on the warm summer breeze, those who watched knew they were witnessing the start of something special, the birth of a new legacy, the dawn of a brighter tomorrow. For James and Sarah, for Robert and John, and for all those whose lives they would touch in the years to come, this was more than just a wedding day. It was a celebration of love, of family, of second chances. It was the first chapter in a story that was just beginning, a story of hope, courage, and the unshakable power of the human spirit.